compelling detective story, a cloak and dagger action, and a romantic drama, all these stories were taken from real life. The history of Kazakhstan is inseparable from the world history. Reflections on History, our version.
Saint Petersburg Secrets. He showed that he didn't care about people's opinions at all. Sometimes he even mocked his philistine friends by telling them notorious stories about himself and saying that he had committed some vile action, which wasn't always true. Everything is insignificant in comparison with eternity, he liked to joke. But it seems that in fact he was preoccupied with this idea. He didn't care about being remembered by later generations. It lasted for 15 months, from February 1860 until May 1861. There are only short extracts about the hoaxes, jokes, and the real life of the Kazakh Sultan in Saint Petersburg. Valikhanov was a brilliant person. Members of Petersburg's high society also said that he was a joker. There would be various legends about his amorous adventures and binges in St. Petersburg society. Chapter 1. Dissipated life of a man in full-dress uniform. He liked representing himself as a business-like person, but it was rather in order to show off. Every time he went to Nevsky Prospect, he had a briefcase. In fact, he had quite a dissipated life, and his intelligence bordered glamour and stylishness of a guards officer. In St. Petersburg, Valikhanov was in the military sphere, where being idle, binges, and a meaningless social life were appreciated most of all. He went from Omsk to Moscow by post-chase. For the last part of the journey, he used a new vehicle at the speed of 40 kilometers an hour. The train arrived without significant delays and approached the covered platform of Nevsky station. A young, elegant man wearing a military uniform got off the train and went to the hotel. Now it's an ordinary house, which was reconstructed. But in the 19th century it was a popular hotel. People such as Pushkin, Chadayev and Griboyedov stayed there. The hotel was always packed, despite the fact that staying in the cheapest room cost 25 rubles, which was a huge sum of money at the time. It was Valikhanov's first address in St. Petersburg. Where else could the brilliant officer, descendant of a Khan, live with glamour and glitz, the tendencies which would reduce later? He was only 24. He was young and cocky. Despite this, he was already experienced. He'd just returned from a dangerous expedition to Kashgar. When he arrived in St. Petersburg, his arrival generated some excitement because, if we compare it with our time, it was the same as a person's return from a space journey. Astronauts, especially the first ones, were met with similar excitement and admiration. The scientific part of the Kashgar journey was written in Omsk. As for the operational report, including the reconnaissance data and information about their agent network, researchers suppose that most of this was written in St. Petersburg. He had to prepare the operational report in order to provide his superiors with this information. What was thought to be a geographical society was in fact a reconnaissance department. Chokhan often presented reports in the house situated on the Moika embankment. The first time he delivered the Kashgar report as well as a lecture about nomadic people's literature. It took 15 minutes to walk with his briefcase across Pevchesky Bridge and then along Nevsky Prospect. He walked in 3 places, one of which was this geographical society. He worked in the Asian department of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Military and the Scientific Committee producing maps of Central Asia. It was a military ministry. At the same time, he worked in a university where he communicated with Orientalists and intensively studied Oriental manuscripts and documents. Incidentally, 4 years later, when academic Velyaminov-Zernov was studying the manuscripts Valikhanov had worked on, he found out when the Kazakh Khanate had been established. So it turned out that Chokhan had been about to make this discovery, but his departure from St. Petersburg prevented him from doing it.
Он прежде всего ученый.
First of all, Chokhan Valikhanov was a great scientist. He dedicated his work to studying the history of Kazakh people and their neighbors. So we can disagree with Yadrintsev, who said that he led a dissipated life. Chapter 2. Sparks on Nevsky Prospect. Demutov-in is not the only place where Chokhan lived, but it's the only one which is known. Anyway, wherever he lived, he managed to live comfortably. The table was covered with expensive trinkets arranged with perfect symmetry. He liked elegant things and collected cigarette cases. He didn't choose them because they were expensive, but was attracted by their idea. For example, there was a rat boring at the ground with a gimlet on one of them. Potanin wrote that Chokhan was a geologist. According to him, one of Valikhanov's flats was situated on the south side of the main Saint Petersburg prospect. Democratic students gathering took place there, and under the influence of the ascetic Potanin, they didn't drink any alcohol and ate only plain food. The facade of 240 buildings faces Nevsky Prospect. The right side is officially called the shadow side, while the left side is even and sunny. Now I'm going from one side to the other. Going along the main street accompanied by thunder and lightning was stylish. It was considered very impressive in the 19th century to walk in such a way that the metal part of the sword's scabbard touched the paving stones, producing loud noises and sparks. Chokhan said that once, when he posed as thunder and lightning on Nevsky Prospect, by going along the prospect with his sword on a long strap, Turgenev paid him attention and stepped on his sword. Perhaps Chokhan made up this part. It was typical of him to invent something, to shock people and make up unbelievable stories about himself. Intelligence officers like him were fond of spreading legends about themselves. Although these legends resemble their real life in a way, they are still a bit different from it. His shrewd comments and good sense of humour, which sometimes fell short of the standards of decency, both attracted and repelled people. However, it didn't cause any serious conflicts like a duel. Nevertheless, it resulted in some poetry. According to Yadrintsev, the poet Krestovsky often made use of Chokhan's frivolous plots. Because of their apparent frivolity, these short poems enraged some serious ladies. There is no money or bread in these luxurious chambers, but instead of coins and food, there are passionate kisses. Do you want this beautiful body, beggar? Instead of bread, there is me. Vsevolod Krestovsky later became a writer in Petersburg's Khrushchev-era houses. It's possible that he and Valikhanov together went to the districts which were quite different from the places belonging to members of high society. When Krestovsky got married, the young couple didn't have the money to rent a flat, so they rented an empty dacha where they often used sacks of hay as beds. It's said that the Sybarite Valikhanov visited his friends quite often. They had met thanks to Fyodor Mikhailovich, who said, "Go to Dostoevsky's brother tomorrow. Our friends will be there too." Vsevolod wrote to Chokhan. Dostoevsky's circle was an editorial circle of Times. It's natural that Chokhan Valikhanov was a member of it. It's said that his drawings were in the album of Mikhail Mikhailovich, Dostoevsky's daughter. Yakov Polonsky's autographs and Valikhanov's drawings prove the fact that he was there with others. It was one circle. It was easy for him to enter any circle, including scientific societies, student parties, and high society receptions. Chapter 3. Sprucing up like Pushkin. Pushkin often lodged his characters in Demutov-in. For instance, the captain Minsky from the station master lived in Demutov-in. A better description of a room in this inn is given in Eugene Onegin. It's considered that the study of Chadaev, who also lived in Demutov-in, provided material for the description of Eugene Onegin's study. The line, "You can be a business-like person and care about the beauty of your nails," refers to the dandy Chadaev. Valikhanov also met the standards set by Pushkin. His clothes were elegant. He took care of his appearance, and the nail on his little finger was long, exactly like Alexander Sergeyevich's. At the same time, he was critical of himself. Moreover, he was ironic towards himself. In this book, there is a very typical cartoon characteristics of himself. He shows a Sybarite hussar lying on an ottoman and smoking a cigarette. This man looks like a carefree playboy. Only quite wealthy people could afford the hussar lifestyle. Their very uniform was expensive, and as a rule, they had their frock suits sewn twice a year. It was necessary for the lining to be white. This white lining distinguished people from high society. It's easy to make the white lining dirty. As a result, you have to either change it or your frock coat. In addition, there was a carriage from going to the palace and special events, visits, flirtation in saloons, paying for bouquets, etc., etc. They learned to pay compliments and fall in love at the ball, said the poet Nevsky. It was necessary to go there. Governmental issues were often settled and people heard the latest news there. As a rule, balls opened with a grand polonaise and finished with a sensual waltz. It takes 3 steps to dance the waltz, and only 2 to go crazy. He turned so many heads with hairstyles a la Anna Karenina. He was crazy about them too. It's a little-known fact that Pushkin wrote poetry, at least in Saint Petersburg. It was a romantic poem, however the words were crossed out. Perhaps he tried to write, but didn't manage to do it properly. Nevertheless, it's obvious that he had very strong feelings. Apparently, it will remain a mystery what a strong feeling it was and who inspired it. I found a note left for him by Krestovsky. It says, "I dropped by and took Manya's photo." Who was this Manya? Yes, people say that he had romantic relationships in St. Petersburg. However, there is no information about them in his scientific works. It's not surprising that in 2 remaining letters to his parents, he mainly asks them to send money. I had no money at all for a few days. You know that without money a person can die from hunger in this city. I'm ashamed to ask you, but it's even worse to be burdened with debt. It would be convenient if you would send me a little sum of money every month. In this case, the expenses will reduce. If you have a lot of money, it is not difficult to spend it. As for hunger, he apparently exaggerated to move his parents. However, it wasn't a complete lie. 2 bills have remained. One of them from Demutov's inn, where he paid 9 rubles for a dinner. It was considered a sum of money. The other one was from a simpler place. There he paid 9 rubles for a month. The first bill included a lot of elaborate dishes. The second one was only tea and buns. It was important for him to keep both bills, so that he could show that he could afford living in a grand style, and that he could survive on hot tea and buns too. In the letters to his father, he deliberately mentioned his connections with important people in St. Petersburg. They included people holding high positions and titles, such as the Minister of War, the head of the Holy Synod, senators, counts and princes. "I'm on familiar terms with all of them and pay them visits," Pushkin wrote. His father praised him for having such connections, but advised him not to waste money. Epilogue: Along the impassable roads to the eternity. Good connections with people of high status could quickly lead to a brilliant, promising career. However, he didn't pursue it. He left St. Petersburg in a strange way. Although he had so many plans, including study and scientific work, he suddenly left the city. Presumably, he did it to carry out a secret mission. According to the official version, he had to improve his declining health, but instead of going to European resorts by a comfortable ship, the sick person went on a 1,000-verst journey along impassable Russian roads. It doesn't seem logical, but researchers haven't yet been able to figure out the truth. We've not had a new source of information referring to Pushkin Valikhanov for almost 50 years. However, there are some, and we need to look for them. He always provoked gossips. He didn't care about his status in his descendants' memory. The main thing was what he would leave for them. Idle speculations are insignificant in comparison with eternity.